Hello everyone, it's Mr. Westner. I am so excited because today we are starting my favorite subject, Pennsylvania history. So it's time to start social studies. Okay. Now, just a little background. I have loved history. My love of history started for me when I was in fourth grade. So when I was in your shoes is when I first learned how much fun history could be, how much I enjoyed studying history. I was at Blair Elementary School, which isn't there anymore. Eventually, I think in the early 1990s, 1992, if I'm not mistaken, Frankstown School and Blair School combined into the Frankstown School that's there today. So I had first, second, and third grade in kindergarten at Frankstown, and then they moved us out to Blair for fourth and fifth grade. And I had a great teacher in fourth grade and then a great history teacher in fifth grade too, Mr. Bridges and Mr. Jones. And in fifth grade, I also worked a little bit with Mr. Cook and Mr. Menino, and I had people who loved history. And then my father loved history, so I got to experience that with my parents, my mother too. But we traveled, we got to see some historic places. We went to Gettysburg, we went to Washington, D.C., to the monuments and the history museums there. We went to the different battlefields, Civil War battlefields in Maryland and Virginia. We went to Colonial Williamsburg and visited Thomas Jefferson's home. So the best way to learn about history is to be there, to travel, to see it, and to experience some of those places. And I've never stopped enjoying traveling to historic sites and visiting museums. So I couldn't recommend that highly enough. Make sure you take the time to do those things. Okay. So today we're going to start talking about history, but actually before we can get into history, we're going to talk a little bit about geography. Okay? Geography is the study of landforms, the study of places, maps, the way the land looks. And that's all an important part of history because these things influence the events that happen throughout history. So we need to start out by taking a look at the landforms that make up Pennsylvania. So that's what we're going to do. If you don't have your book, I'm going to be posting an ebook again. So there will be an ebook posted here in Google Classroom. And we're going to be looking today at Lesson 1, of course, Chapter 1, Lesson 1. And the lesson title here is Land and Water. So the land and water in Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, let me see. I wonder if I can do this digitally. If you haven't done it yet, I think I'm going to try to post a map on Google Classroom. And I want you to try to name the states without Googling. No cheating. It's not graded anyway. Without cheating, name the states that border Pennsylvania and the body of water. Okay? So just take a moment and do that. I should have a Google form there that you'll be able to fill out. So pause me, come back later, fast forward 3 minutes in, and then go ahead and do that. Okay? And then when you're back, we'll continue. Okay? So the point of that, and most of the time when I do that activity, there are very few people over the years that I've been doing this, and I've probably been doing this. This is my 16th year teaching fourth grade as I record this. So I bet I've been doing that for at least 15 out of the 16 years, maybe all 16, I don't know. But very few people have ever gotten all 7 of those bordering areas correct. Okay? So that's kind of interesting. We live here, but we don't always know a lot about the area we call home. So that's what this is about. It's understanding our spot in the United States, our position. Okay? So I really like the layout of your social studies book. Now, unfortunately, your social studies book's in black and white. Okay? Economics is another part of social studies. So the reason your social studies book is in black and white, if you think about it, where can they sell your math book? Well, they can sell it everywhere in the United States and really everywhere that anybody speaks English and understands English. Where can they sell your reading books? They can sell them all over the country. Where can they sell a Pennsylvania history book? Okay. Now, it'd be great to think that somebody in Idaho cares about Pennsylvania history, but they're not going to have a whole school class set up for it. So these books can only be sold in one place. Color ink is really expensive, so the publisher made a decision that since they weren't going to be able to sell as many of these, they'd use fewer colors. So they just have the black and the red and the grays. So that's the reason your book looks like that. But when we're in the room together, I bring it to life with all kinds of pictures and things on the board and videos, and I'll be doing that here too. I'll have good colorful backgrounds, hopefully with my green screen, and I'll be sharing lots of video links and information as we go through our Pennsylvania history content together. So don't worry too much about the black and whiteness of your book. Okay? Build on what you know. Your social studies book always starts with a build on what you know that kind of connects things to where we are. Then there's a main idea paragraph, and I love that. Just like in your science book, there was the main idea that they pulled out. They do that here, and it's kind of pulled out above everything else. And then they get into the body, the text. Okay. They also separate the vocab words over on the side, so that makes it easy to understand some of the key points. Our vocab words for this lesson are region, landform, elevation, and climate. And then they give you a vocab strategy, and that works not just in social studies, but in any subject. And here they're talking about compound words, and it says when you're thinking about what a compound word means, if you're looking at a word and it's made up of two smaller words, think about the meaning of those two words. So they give the example of landform. Well, land, we know what land is. Form is the shape of something. So a landform is the form, the shape, the type of land. Okay, and we'll find out those other words here as we go as well. So our build on what you know paragraph says, how would you describe the land where you live? Think about that for a minute. What's the land like around us? Is it flat? Is it hilly? Is it mountainous? Different areas of Pennsylvania look different depending on the features that make up the land. And in a minute, in a little bit, I'm going to have a tour posted where we're going to kind of use Google Earth to travel across the state. And we're going to look at the landforms in different parts of Pennsylvania. So we'll check that out. Okay. Pennsylvania's land is our first main heading. The main idea there says that Pennsylvania is located in the eastern part of the United States and has 5 major land regions. Okay? I'm going to scoot over here and I'm going to put a map right there. Okay? So if you look at the United States, there's Pennsylvania in the eastern part of the United States, maybe there, I don't know. See, because right now this is all green behind me, so I'm going to put the map in later. So hopefully Pennsylvania is somewhere around where my finger is. I'm thinking maybe it'll be like right there. Okay. And so Pennsylvania is in the eastern part of the United States, and that's important. I said this landform stuff influenced other things. Because Pennsylvania is in the eastern part of the United States, when early settlers were traveling here from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean, Pennsylvania was among the first places they would reach, along with Massachusetts, Virginia, parts of New York. Those areas were some of the first areas that settlers would reach because of ocean currents and because of our location in the eastern part of the United States. Okay. A region is an area of land that has one or more features in common. Sometimes regions are based on physical features, such as landforms. A landform is a certain type of land, such as a mountain or valley. So the Mid-Atlantic region is the area in the middle of the United States, the continent, because we have the New England region way up north, we have the Southeast, we have the West, the Pacific Northwest. So there's different areas. In the Midwest, there's different regions of the United States. We're in the Mid-Atlantic region. We're a Mid-Atlantic state. Okay. The land in northwest Pennsylvania is near sea level. Sure I didn't miss something. No. The land in northwest Pennsylvania is near sea level, or the level of the surface of the world's oceans. That's kind of our starting point for measuring elevation. Okay. We'll get to elevation here in just a minute. If you travel across the state's mountains, forests, and rocky plateaus, you would see that Pennsylvania's elevation changes across the state. A plateau is a high, mostly flat area. It's also a strange looking word if you're following along. But a plateau, most people know what a mountain is. They know what plains are, flatlands. But plateau is sometimes a new word to us in 4th grade. So a plateau is where the land kind of starts out going up like a mountain. Okay? And then if it were a mountain, it would drop back down. But if it's a plateau, that land rises in elevation and then it stays up. Okay? It doesn't go back down. So that's the difference between a plateau and a mountain. A plateau is when the elevation climbs and stays up. A mountain, the elevation climbs but then drops back down. So we're talking about a plateau there. Okay? Elevation is the height of a landform above sea level. Pennsylvania's elevation changes from 0 feet to more than 3,000 feet. So we've got some big changes in elevation, and we'll look at that again in that Google Maps tour that we'll take here after we finish this video. Pennsylvania's regions, over on the next page. Pennsylvania consists of 5 regions: Allegheny Plateau, Erie Lowland, Ridge and Valley, Piedmont, and Atlantic Coastal Plain. Now, most of those regions, the names make sense. Okay? Allegheny Plateau is a plateau with the Allegheny Mountains. The Erie lowland is lowland near Lake Erie in the northwest. Okay? The Atlantic Coastal Plain is flat land near the Atlantic Ocean. Now, Pennsylvania doesn't border the Atlantic Ocean, but we get kind of close over in southeast Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. It's a very small region when we're looking at the Atlantic Coastal Plain. Ridge and valley, we have ridges, mountains, and valleys, low spaces between the mountains. But it's Piedmont that's kind of the name that doesn't really make sense to us at first, unless you start to break it down. So Mont means mountains. Okay? Piedmont, the Mont part of that means mountains. So what about the Pied part? And that's where everybody in class always giggles and laughs at me when I say, what about the Pied part? But the Pied part is important. Okay? The Pied in Piedmont, it's not P-E-E-D, it's not going to the bathroom. The Pied in Piedmont is the same root word that gives you pedal on a bike, or podiatrist, the doctor who studies the feet and he works to help your feet feel better. So ped or pod, or in this case Piedmont, I believe it's a French word. Okay? The Pied part means foot. Okay? So Piedmont literally translates as foot of the mountains. And that's where the Piedmont region is. It's in the, I'm going to put the map of my regions up here, but we have the Atlantic Coastal Plain, then we move over to the Piedmont, then the Ridge and Valley, Allegheny Plateau, and Erie Lowland. Hopefully my hand is matching up with what you're seeing. Okay? So the Piedmont is at the foot of the mountains. Well, what does that mean? We're lucky. If you're watching this and you're one of my students, we go to foot of 10 elementary. Okay? So why are we called foot of 10? Well, it's because we're at the bottom, and you probably learned this in third grade, at least you should have. If you didn't, I won't tell your third grade teachers. But if you are, or if you don't remember rather, I won't tell your third grade teachers. But if you're at the foot of 10, we were at the foot of the 10th step on the Allegheny Portage Railroad as the canal boats climbed over the mountains and toward Johnstown. Okay? And actually they counted backwards. So Johnstown is 1. The Lemon House, if you've ever seen that at the top of Crescent Mountain, that's the head of 6, so the top of the 6th step. We're at the foot, the bottom of the 10th step. And that's where the 6 to 10 trail, if you've ever ridden your bike or gone for a walk on the 6 to 10 trail not far from the school, that 6 to 10 trail gets its name from that as well. It goes from Plane 6 at the top of Crescent Mountain down to Plane 10 not far from us at foot of 10. So the Piedmont, foot of the mountains, before you go into the mountains. They're going to take us through each of these regions one by one here. The Allegheny Plateau is the largest region in Pennsylvania. It covers about half of the state. The Allegheny Plateau has deep valleys, flat-topped ridges, and hardwood forests. The Pocono Mountains are located in this region. Mount Davis is also located in this region. It is the highest point in the state at 3,213 feet above sea level. The Erie Lowland region borders Lake Erie. A long time ago, this narrow strip of land was part of the lake bed. Now it is a level, sandy plain. The Ridge and Valley region is a wide strip of land that lies in the center of the state. The Allegheny and Appalachian Mountains are located here. This region has forests, ridges, valleys, and rolling hills. The Great Valley is found in this region. Okay? The Great Valley area is sort of down in the area where Harrisburg is located. Very good farmland in the Great Valley, also not far from the Lancaster area, if you're familiar with that area of the state. Then we get into the Piedmont region, which is actually where Lancaster itself is located. The Piedmont is found in the southeastern portion of the state. It has hills and valleys. South Mountain and Redding Prong are found in the Piedmont region. And then finally, the Atlantic Coastal Plain is a narrow strip of land located in the far southeastern portion of the state. It is a low, flat, sandy plain. Now, I went through that kind of quickly, and the reason I did that is because in that next video where I take you on the tour through the state, I'll get into more detail about each of these regions, and we'll kind of revisit some of this. So we'll come back to that very soon. All right, so let's take a look across Pennsylvania. And we'll start here in the, who remembers what region was in the lower southeast part of the state here? that is not far from the Atlantic Ocean, which is right over here, where our largest city, Philadelphia, is located. This is the Atlantic Coastal Plain. So we are heading down into the Atlantic Coastal Plain. And because it's a plain, as we would expect, it should be, the landforms should be very flat. I just realized, I wonder if I can, slide myself around here. Okay, now, if I go right into Philadelphia, just take this little guy. If you've never played around with Google Earth, check out Google Earth. It's really cool. I'll put a link to it right here. You can type in your house. You can go look at your house. You can go to different places. I like to go to Disney World, of course, but you can check out all kinds of cool things. What I'm going to do here is if I go to street level view, it actually, going into somebody's store there, it looks like shipping store. Let's see, FedEx? I don't know. Retail office. Anyway, the problem right here, there's McDonald's, anybody hungry? Is I can get a little bit of a feel for the landforms, but it's kind of tricky in a larger city like this because there's so many buildings around. But you do notice, hopefully looking around, the land itself is very flat. There's no mountains in the distance. This is a very flat area, and that's what the Atlantic Coastal Plain is. So when we're in that Atlantic Coastal Plain area, it is very flat. Let me see if I can get myself back out of there. There we go. Okay, and I'll try to find, unfortunately, in the Atlantic Coastal Plain, it's mostly large city spaces. Okay, so here we are in Philadelphia. I scoot down just a little bit here, bit more rural. If I go into this area, so let's try that and see what happens. There's a good example as well. Now it kind of gets computerized there. We have some trees. Beautiful. Okay. But again, you have the trees there, but no mountains, no hills, very, very flat area. So that's the Atlantic Coastal Plain. That's what the Atlantic Coastal Plain looks like. And it's not just in Pennsylvania. Anywhere you travel along the East Coast, when you're near the ocean like this, you're going to be in very flat areas. It's one of the things I always look forward to when I'm driving home from a trip to the beach, because it's always very flat toward the beach. But once you start getting back toward Pennsylvania, you start to see those big, beautiful mountains again. And it's one of the things I love about the area where we live. If we lived in the eastern part of the state, we wouldn't see that. Okay. So let's move next. Zoom back out to get my bearings. Make sure I know where I am. Okay. If you notice, north kind of flipped around there, so I need to flip us back here. Put north back at the top of our map like we're used to. And we'll head over here into the Piedmont region. So in the area around Lancaster and York, those areas are in Piedmont. Remember what Piedmont means? Okay. Piedmont is at the foot of the mountains. Okay. So let's see. I want to find an area that's not too rural or too urban. And we'll drop ourselves down maybe right over here. Let's see what we can see. So this would be the Piedmont region. And you're going to notice it's quite similar. Let me see. Over here in the bottom corner, if you can see my mouse, this is our elevation. So our camera is 123 meters above sea level. I don't know if I can change the units there to something we're more familiar with. On my school computer, usually it has that information in feet. And I don't know. That's a setting I missed. Just check this out here real quick. units of measurement. There we go. So we'll change that to feet and miles like we're used to. Most of the world uses the metric system, but here we don't. So our elevation here is 404 feet. Where are we? Wow, I put us down, I think, right beside a covered bridge. Isn't that neat? Okay, very cool. Fortunately, I don't think it's going to let me zoom out of that. Okay. Oh, we're right along a beautiful little stream there. Lots of farmland in the Piedmont area. Going under the bridge. That's interesting. Okay. And I love to play around, like I said, with Google Earth. I play around with it some, but every time I do, I learn something new, and this is really neat right here. Okay. I'm also used to using the version on my desktop at school and not the version on the Chromebook that I'm using here from home. Yeah, there we go. And there's our elevation. Now it's giving us the camera's elevation. So we're up in the air now, 2,000 feet in the air. That was the Conestoga River, and there's that covered bridge that we were just underneath. So that's kind of neat. Let me pop myself out here in the field, though, so we can get a better view. It's telling me no street view is available from there or there. Okay. So that doesn't always work for us. Let me at least go 3D here and zoom us down. Can I look? Well, I think we're getting the idea at least, and I don't want to keep you watching this too long. So once again, the Piedmont is relatively flat, a little bit of a higher elevation. We do occasionally get some hills and things in the Piedmont region, like that area might let me go. Over here, put my little guy there. Will it let me see? So that's a good example. So we're actually kind of on a small hill here now. You saw some hills as we were coming in. So nothing major, but we do have some elevation changes where we have some of these smaller hills. Looks like this road is going up a hill. Whoa, I just threw myself in the corner there. So we start to see some elevation changes. We can see now here again, the camera's at about 462 feet above sea level as we're on this road. Let's see what we have there. Yep, this is the Amish area of Pennsylvania, where we see a lot of the Amish people living, and they're well known for their skills with farming and their very simple lifestyle. And so that is Ridge and Valley, or I'm sorry, that is Piedmont. Next, we're going to Ridge and Valley. Okay. Let's put north back at the top again. Flip us around here. Zoom out. And the Ridge and Valley is probably my favorite region to look at here on Google Earth because you can really see where that region got its name. Now, if you've ever traveled east on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you know that one of the things you do is go through some tunnels. If I put the turnpike on here, let me see, I think I can do that pretty easily. Map style, that's what I want. Just one for a second because the roads kind of clutter things up a little bit if I leave the roads on, but if I put them on for just a second here. Should add which road is which here. There they come. Oops. Okay, right there is Interstate 76, and that is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So if we're traveling on that road, we actually go right through some mountains. And as you're going on that turnpike road, you're going through the mountains, and that's exactly where those tunnels are that you find. So right there are some tunnels that we travel through. If for traveling on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And this really shows, really helps to highlight the Ridge and Valley region, because right here you see these mountains, you see these ridges, and then in between the ridges, of course, are the lower valley areas. And if we zoom in on a couple of those here, see if it'll let me put my little guy down top of one of those ridges. So there we are. Our elevation here, you've seen now we're at 1,568 feet above sea level. So we are, looks like, at the top of one of those ridges on a road, Cold Spring Road in Spring Run, Pennsylvania, if you're curious. But yeah, our elevation is very high there, 1,568 feet. We're 1,000 feet above where we were when we were in the Piedmont region a few minutes ago. If we pop ourselves back out here, we're going to stay in the same region, but I want to go from that ridge, and that's not even the highest point, as you'll see there. If I go up here, it's not going to let me, unfortunately, put my little guy down there to check the elevation. We're just with the camera elevation here, but that's the ridge. And if I go kind of right next to it, down here where the turnpike is, and I land us here, I suspect our elevation will be much lower. Let's see. Yeah, we're now at 869 feet above sea level, so almost half the height above sea level from where we were on the top of that ridge. So that's what we see in the Ridge and Valley. We see a lot of changing elevations. We see big mountains and then these low valleys in between them. So that's what we're kind of looking at when we're in this Ridge and Valley region. And it so happens that that is where most of us live. Okay, when I say that, I'll show you why here. Let's go ahead and go home. So if I hit this little search box over here, it will let me type in foot of 10 elementary and let Google do its thing, and it's going to fly us home. And right there we are. And the Ridge and Valley is the second largest region in Pennsylvania. So we are kind of right on the border where we are here at Foot of 10. So there is our school. And you can see some of the other things around it as the image clears up here a little bit. There's the parking lot up by the kindergarten entrance. For here, we have the playground. There's the jungle gym. Looks like this may have been taken. Let's see. Because Google isn't live pictures. You couldn't walk outside the school right now and wave and have Google see you. Looks like, is the new playground installed? I don't think so. I don't know if it'll let me plop down here or not. No, I didn't think so. Okay, but yeah, it looks like the old playground equipment there. So this picture would have been taken a couple years ago, probably. There's our school. And the reason I come here is because if we leave our school, then right up here is Route 22. And this is where we're going to be heading into the Allegheny Plateau. Let's see if I can put this little guy down here for a minute. Okay, right there's, I think, yep. Okay, so we're up on Route 22 right there. And this is going up Crescent Mountain. Our elevation right here is 1,163 feet above sea level. And if I start traveling along the road here, and actually I'm going to exit out and go back this way so that I can travel. As we go here, we're going to be going up Crescent Mountain. And that's where we get into the Allegheny Plateau area. Okay. So we're at foot of 10. We're right there at the edge of the ridge and valley and right as we go up into the Allegheny Plateau. And when we do that, we're going to see here in a moment, the elevation is going to really jump because we learned that's what a plateau is. It's when the elevation increases and then stays high and mostly flat. Right there's the Plain 9 Reservoir. You've all probably driven past that at some point. Zoom out a little more so we can cover more ground here. Okay. You can see here these big mountains of the Allegheny Plateau. Sometimes it's called the Allegheny Front. There's the second reservoir, the Blair Gap Reservoir. Alrighty. And up here we are at the top by the Lemon House. And the Allegheny Portage Railroad Historic Site. Also a great place to check out if you're ever looking for something close to home to do. Really neat little museum there. But if we just check here, our elevation at the very top of Crescent Mountain, we are now 2,413 feet above sea level. So a big climb from where we were at foot of 10, where we were around 1,100 feet above sea level, all the way up to 2,413 feet above sea level. I believe the highest point in Pennsylvania, Mount Davis, is about 3,200 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So we're pretty high at this point. But look around at the land. Okay, even though we're very high, it's now very flat. It's going to stay that way for the most part. Now, there's still going to be some elevation changes, some hills and some changes, but not like what we see in the Ridge and Valley region. So there's some places where there's some hills and things here, kind of like what we saw in the Piedmont. So that's why we said a plateau is a high, mostly flat area. It's not like we're just going to go right back down the way we would with those ridges. So now that we're up here, we're going to stay pretty high up. And the Allegheny Plateau, actually, if I zoom out here, back to the whole state, let's put north back to where it belongs. Let's get rid of those roads again that make it a little tricky. But looking at Pennsylvania, all of this is Allegheny Plateau. So these areas where we didn't really go, this is Allegheny Plateau, and then it kind of curves around and then all the way over to Pittsburgh. All of this is the Allegheny Plateau region. We have the Ridge and Valley over here, Piedmont down here, Atlantic Coastal Plain on this side by Philadelphia. That means the only place we have left to visit is the Erie Lowland region. So let's check that out up here near Lake Erie. And again, Erie's a fairly large town. So if I go right into Erie, I may not be able to see the landform as well. So we'll go just outside the city of Erie where we're still on that Erie Lowland area. Let's see where it will let me put my little guy down. Drop him in over here and see what we can see. Oh, wow, pretty. But like it was in the Atlantic coastal plain, you see, wow, this is a great spot because it really shows, I think, how flat it is in this area. We see some ridges of trees, but no real mountains around here. And like it said, this was once part of the lake bed. So at one time, long, long ago, thousands of years ago, this area would have been underwater, maybe even millions of years ago. But this whole area would have been under the waters of Lake Erie. It was once part of the lake bed. So it's very, very flat. Okay. All right, so that is a short little trip across Pennsylvania, thanks to Google Earth. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing some of those landforms, and it helps you to kind of understand the things that we read about, where you see how these landforms change as you travel across the state and go through these different places. So that is our state. I would definitely encourage you, check out Google Earth. It's web-based. You don't have to download anything, so you can just kind of check that out on the Chromebook. It's earth.google.com. I'm going to post the link here as well. But check it out. Go places. Check out different places. You can go to other countries. You can see things. It's really a handy tool. And it's fun sometimes to just explore. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks so much for watching. Now, along with Pennsylvania's land, the other thing we're going to talk about here is Pennsylvania's climate. Okay? Now, what's climate? Climate is the weather over a long period of time. It's what the weather acts like. So if I say, oh, wow, it's February and it's 70 degrees, that's not climate. That's one kind of unusual day in February. Okay? Or if you have a cool day in the summer, oh, wow, it's July, but it only got to 64 degrees today. That's really rare. That's unusual. So that's not climate. And knowing climate is what tells us that that's unusual. It tells us what the weather is normally like. Oh, I know it's July. It's usually going to be hot and humid and warm. Okay? So our main idea here says that Pennsylvania's climate is influenced by its location and landforms. Now, there's names for different kinds of climates. There's tropical climates. Those are nice. Okay, warm, moist areas in the area known as the tropics. There are tundra-type climates. Okay? There are desert climates. So there's different types of climates in the earth. And you can Google that. Look up different types of climates or climate zones on Earth, and you can find some interesting information there. But Pennsylvania, most of us, we have a continental climate, it's called. And a continental climate, oh, I skipped a sentence there. Climate is the typical weather of a place over a long period of time. I skipped it because I had already explained it. Places with a continental climate like us have temperatures that are cold in the winter and warm in the summer. And that definitely describes the weather in Pennsylvania. We have cold winters, warm summers. Okay? Pennsylvania's climate varies from region to region. There are some differences depending on where you're located in the state. And that goes back to that main idea. Climate is influenced by location. Location and elevation affect each region's climate. Okay? Regions with higher elevations usually have cooler temperatures and more precipitation than regions with lower elevations. Now, you probably know that just from your own experience. In the wintertime, when you're watching the delay list coming across the TV, where's the area that gets delayed first? Well, it's those mountain schools. It's Penn Cambria, Northern Cambria, Central Cambria. It's the schools in Johnstown because they have a higher elevation than we do in Duncansville, Hollidaysburg. So those areas are going to get more precipitation and it stays colder there. It might be cold enough for it to snow there, and here in Hollidaysburg it's raining, or maybe it doesn't do anything at all because all the precipitation was used up as the clouds moved over the mountains. So we see that. Here's an example. Here's a picture of Mount Kilimanjaro. Mount Kilimanjaro is very close to the equator in Africa. The equator is normally very warm, but on the very top of Mount Kilimanjaro, there's snow because it's a very high mountain. It's the highest, tallest mountain on the continent of Africa. So examples like that can kind of remind us, oh, wow, yeah, elevation affects our climate. Higher elevations are colder because there's snow there, and they get more precipitation because there's snow there. Precipitation, as you hopefully know, is water that falls to the earth as rain, hail, sleet, or snow. In the mountains of Pennsylvania's Ridge and Valley region, the temperatures are colder than in regions with lower elevations. The Allegheny Plateau also has a cooler climate. This area is usually humid in the summer. The Piedmont and Atlantic coastal plain regions in southeast Pennsylvania have the warmest climate of the state's 5 regions. Winter is usually mild in these 2 regions. The Erie lowland has a mild climate. This is because the waters of Lake Erie warm the shores of this region. So in Lake Erie, or with large bodies of water like Lake Erie, they warm up more slowly and cool down more slowly. So it takes longer for the Erie area to get warm in the summer because the cool water in the lake is keeping the area cooler. It also takes longer for Erie to get cold in the winter. Now Erie, it mentions, has a mild climate. Well, Erie does get a lot of snow, even though their temperatures may be a little warmer. When it's in the 20s here or the teens, it may be in the upper 20s or even low 30s there, but there's so much moisture coming off of that lake, they get a lot of snow in the wintertime, even though their temperatures may be slightly warmer than they are in the center of the state where we are. Okay. Last page here talks about the water cycle, and I know this is review for you. I know you guys all know condensation, evaporation, precipitation, runoff. Hopefully you remember all those terms from science class, but just in case, we'll review that here briefly. The water cycle says that each of Pennsylvania's regions is affected by the water cycle. The water cycle is the movement of water from the earth into the atmosphere. What's that called? Evaporation. Very good. So from the earth into the atmosphere is evaporation, turning from water into a vapor, into gas. And then back again, and that's precipitation, okay, when we turn from the gas back into the water. Okay. And then the other step in that, it shows here in your book, is runoff. So the water running off the land and back into larger bodies of water like a lake. Okay. This cycle has been occurring throughout the Earth's history. I thought it was funny when I watched Frozen 2 with my daughter. I forget if it was the 36th time or the 37th, but I caught Olaf talking about water. The water that we drink, the water that we bathe in, has passed through, I forget how many animals he says. But over the course of Earth's history, we haven't added any water. There's no new water. It just kind of keeps recycling. So the water we use is the same water George Washington drank once upon a time, or the same water that ancient Egyptians used as they were building the pyramids, perhaps. So it's just kind of neat that that water that's on the earth today is the same water. It just keeps evaporating, condensing, and then precipitating. So I always thought that was pretty neat as a person who enjoys history. Water changes form several times during this cycle. The sun causes water to evaporate. The evaporated water later returns to Earth as precipitation. Okay. There's a couple questions here at the end and some wrap-up things. So there's a review question there. It says, in what way are the climates of the Erie lowland and the Ridge and Valley region different? Even though they're both in Pennsylvania, what ways are their climates different? Well, we talked about the Erie lowland region. It has a mild climate. Ridge and Valley, you're going to have those ridges with a lot more precipitation and cooler temperatures than maybe where the valleys are. Our lesson summary, those are always important because they kind of remind you of the key things. So if you're trying to remember the main ideas, the big things to remember out of this lesson, it's that Pennsylvania has 5 regions. I'm going to want you to remember the names of those 5 regions. We're going to be practicing those and coming back to that. Each region's landforms and location influence its climate. Why it matters? Well, throughout history, the state's geography and climate have affected where Pennsylvanians live and what they do. And as we continue through our Pennsylvania history time together, we're going to find out exactly how these landforms and regions have influenced the actions of the people living here. Okay? So we're going to wrap up our reading part here. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you next time.